Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. I'm Daniel Hopewell. I'm here with my co-host, the inimitable Mr. Simon Delaney. How are you doing, Simon?
Yeah, good, thanks. Not too bad at all.
Excellent. So this is our very first podcast. We've both been a guest on podcast before, but this is the first time we're actually hosting it. So we'll have to see how we do on this side of the camera, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Just to give a little overview into the kind of intentions behind this, the ultimate plan for this is to kind of do an explanation, in-depth dive into all things that are kind of B2C lead generation related. Specifically, we're going to talk to people who are kind of leading the industry, industry professionals, and people who are kind of really leading the way in this world, and just sort of see who's kind of the cutting edge of all things lead generation related. Each episode will have a sort of a subject to it, and whether that's a niche, a vertical industry within lead generation, or as we're going to do today, a specific type of lead generation. So just to kind of get things rolling, the first episode we're going to look at native lead generation, and we've got a great guest in the form of Joe Williams who's going to join us shortly, and he's going to give us some real insights, I think, into how that would operate and what we can learn from that.
I think I'm looking forward to speaking to Joe, getting some insights into native from a guy who's been doing it for years and I consider an expert in it. So I think there'll be a lot of valuable insights that he gives us, definitely.
Great stuff. Let's get stuck in.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I didn't know I was the first guest, but it's all good.
Yeah, I'm going to set the bar high, I think. See how
we go. See, yeah. Hope so.
You're working from home, I assume, with the sofa behind you.
Home. Yeah, I have to admit, I do go into the office occasionally. So we're based in Box, which is a village outside of Bath. So very much rural. Office only down the road. So I occasionally pop in just to escape the same four walls, but working from home today.
Yeah, I've been doing that. I've been going into the office, but there's no one else there. But it's just
weird, right? Yeah.
Apart from I am in the office right now, so got 3 floors all to myself. Not very much to do, but yeah.
So Joe, I'm just going to, by way of introduction, I'm just going to explain that Joe Williams has a huge amount of experience in native lead generation. You set up the native arm of Digital Box, and then you sold that to Rev Content, and then you were the UK Managing Director of Rev Content for 3 years. You're now the founder of Version 2, which is a hugely successful native lead generation agency in the UK. So, I mean, I'm sort of saying that as an introduction to kind of say, listen to this guy who knows what he's talking about when it comes to a native lead gen. But just to kind of get things started, Joe, in your sort of, your own words, how did you get into lead generation, specifically native lead generation?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I kind of fell into it. I was working sales for a digital business in Bath, and got approached by Digital Box, who were running a kind of data business at the time, and they had an idea for a native network called Content Click. And I was kind of doing sales management, so they wanted me to come in and lead that business and grow it over the few years that we had it. So we basically built a native recommendation business similar to Taboola or Outbrain. So content widgets that sit on news sites and drive people to articles or sponsored ads that they may not necessarily have heard of. And we grew that business really successfully. I was running the sales and the operations team, really getting into kind of the nitty gritty of publisher CPMs and what drives performance and stuff that they're interested in. But then equating it back to something the advertiser's interested in. So, actually performance related stuff, it's all well and good putting ads out there, but what are these ads doing? They're paying on a cost per click, but can we relate it back to something that's meaningful, whether that's leads, whether that's sales, whether that's app downloads. And yeah, we grew it successfully for a couple of years, got up to about 40 people, sold it to Rev Content, which is a huge US player in the space. And I kept on a lot of the staff and ran their European business for three and a bit years, until around 2 years ago when I kind of thought, right, I need to start doing this for myself, and take some of the experience that we've got in native. And I thought there's a real good model here where I think native advertising is still undervalued, and brands don't necessarily know or have the skill set to do it themselves in-house, because there's a lot of moving parts with landing pages, which I'm sure we'll go into later. So the idea was, let's take the risk away from brands. Let's do it on a performance basis and use native to drive something that's meaningful for them, whether that's a lead in the lead generation space, whether that's a purchase, whether that's an app download. There's a KPI that we can trade on, and we take off all of that stress and all of that risk. And that's what version 2 is. Because version 1 typically sucks, right? You launch it, use the data, and then version 2 is something that works and is meaningful, and that's the whole idea.
I just did a LinkedIn post the other day talking about the first version of Datable, actually how it was grey, and we called it Ye Old Grey Beast, but we should have actually called it like Data Bow or something, and just put an L on the end when it changed, maybe.
Yeah,
so it was like version 2.
Yeah.
Just on the point with Content Click, what was the reach like compared to Taboola or Outbrain in the UK?
Yeah, we had a slightly different position in that we were going after a lot of the social sites. So this is going back, 2014, that business launched, and native advertising was still pretty new then. Although, the concept of native is advertorials, which have been around in print forever. It's just a digital format of that. Outbrain and Taboola, historically, Outbrain were like broadsheet. So their publishers were like The Guardian, The Independent. And Taboola were tabloid. Their publishers were Daily Mail and The Sun and The Mirror. Nobody was going after this whole new world of social publishers. So we very quickly swept up market share from like Lad Bible, Unilad, The Poke, Hello You, The Tab, all of these huge kind of social Facebook publishers that were growing audiences really quickly. No one was kind of servicing them in terms of good monetization solutions actually fit their market. So that's what we were able to do, is go after this kind of younger crowd of digital publishers, and offer them widgets that had content that was relevant for their audience and grow our market share.
Brilliant. And then the advertisers followed with the target audience that you could go.
Yeah. It's very much a kind of chicken and egg world where, you can get advertisers, but if there's no publishers that fit their demographic, it's really hard, and vice versa. That was the biggest challenge with scaling that business, was getting a publisher who, in a vertical or in a niche that we didn't have advertisers for, and then scrambling around to get the right advertising demand that fits their kind of tone of voice and their articles, or selling it into an advertiser and not necessarily having the right publisher base for it to fit. So you had to kind of scale the two sides fairly equally.
Sure. And I guess with version 2, you're sort of agnostic to type, aren't you? So
100%, yeah. So for us, it's all about just driving, the best quality for our clients, because they pay us for the actual action that takes place. Typically a cost per lead, in which case I don't necessarily prefer, Taboola over Outbrain over Rev Content, Dionomy, Agilite, Google Discovery. We do some stuff on Facebook. There's lots of platforms there. Really, for us, it's focusing on the content. What content do people resonate with, and how do we then drive value from that content? The platform doesn't really matter at that point.
Cool.
Sure. I'm going to jump in there, because you discussed quite a bit, but just in case it wasn't covered, and maybe for anyone hopefully listening who maybe doesn't know about native lead generation, do you think you could give like a sort of a rough overview of native and how it maybe differs from other types of lead generation, and what makes it unique? So
typically native lead gen is sponsored ads that sit below editorial content on major news websites. So, you're surfing around The Sun or The Mirror, reading articles, and then below those articles will be kind of native widgets which recommend up other stories, hopefully either relevant for you, or if not, at least clickable, that you will be intrigued to find out what's behind these little tiles. So it's very small ad real estate. There's only like a thumbnail image and like an 80-character headline that you've got to attract the click, because users are consuming news content. So what native lead gen does is we get users on these really small ad real estates, then we put them through to a middle advertorial page where we then really qualify what the offer's about, what the advertiser's talking about. We educate, we inform, and then we send them off to a lead form where they then submit their details. So we work a lot in financial services, whether that's life insurance, mortgages, credit cards, loans. People who want a quote, to save money on their mortgage, or to see if they could get a cheaper life insurance. We never do ads that are like, here's 50% off life insurance, or here's a mortgage offer. It's just boring, right? And we need to understand that native users are on these websites to consume editorial content. They want to read news articles. Therefore, we present the advertiser's offer as a current article, as an editorial piece. So all of our skill and our kind of time goes into creating these advertorial pages that don't really talk about the brand at all. The first 50% of the article is just around the challenge in the marketplace right now. Here's a problem that lots of UK consumers may have, and here's a misconception about what you may be doing, and here's a solution. And then the solution at the end is, you click through and get a quote, and it's completely free, and you could save yourself a load of money, or make yourself a load of money, or get cheaper car insurance, or whatever it may be. So it's quite an organic journey at that point. because the users almost found it through surfing news and finding it and find out about the subject rather than just being pushed direct response messaging.
And do the clients ever write the advertorials, or do you always write those?
Typically, it's a joint effort. They will supply us with like some copy or some assets, and then we will rewrite it to make it work. It's not an exact science. We can sometimes get stuff and we think it's going to be fantastic, and it just bombs. But again, going back to the whole version 2 thing, is we just rather get it live, see where the breaks in the journey are, see what's working, and then create more stuff that looks like that.
Yeah.
There's definitely an art to getting somebody from an article to then fill in a lead form. It's quite two different things. So having that kind of bridge and taking them on this kind of journey of exploration through to I was reading about the weather and now I'm submitting my details to save money on my mortgage. It's quite an interesting journey and taking them on that kind of path.
Yeah. And have you ever known a brand run an advertorial just for brand awareness without an actual like click through or anything?
They do. Yeah. I'm always skeptical as to why. Because I'm very much like performance based, and we've had back when I was running the networks, you get budgets where they just want reach, they just want eyeballs on pages. I always ask, well, what's the KPI behind this? Do you want people to view X number of pages? Do you want the session time to be below? Do you want to have a number of new users? Do you want them to submit an email? Like, how are you measuring if this is a success or not? And people do it. I don't understand it, but I know there's lots of agencies out there who sell on that world and are very successful who kind of get that whole brand perception and moving the dial in that world. It's not my world at all.
Yeah, I can imagine it might be more suited to like demand generation, for B2B, where they're just sort of going content heavy and really pushing it out there, but not necessarily work as well for B2C.
Yeah, you see some brands, I guess, in the direct to consumer space pushing content that is pure content around stuff that their users may be interested in. So there's Gusto and there's HelloFresh who do a lot in native. They do a lot of direct response native where, they're getting people to sign up to their 50% off their first delivery. But they also do loads of really cool content around like recipe guides and recipe ideas for things you can find in your cupboard. And it's quite a nice journey at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But,
one thing I was going to ask you, Joe, and I might be hard to kind of quantify it in terms of an answer, but obviously when you see an advertorial, you see that it's got to say advertorial on there and things like that. There are certain rules, but I guess at what point do you want the person viewing it to realise it's an advert, and at what point do you want them to sort of just think, oh, this is an article? Do you know what I mean?
It's definitely a fine line. You don't want to be underhand. You don't want to completely hide that it's sponsored. You don't want to hide that it's a brand that's trying to, obviously they've got an objective in mind by putting this piece out there. So you're right. There needs to be advertorial disclosures. Our rough rule of thumb is the first 50% of the advertorial should be talking around the marketplace and the subject rather than about the brand. At that point, hopefully the user's engaged with the subject and they've identified themselves with the problem that you're explaining, and therefore they're open to what the solution is, even if it's a sponsored solution. That's what we usually do, is we have like the top half of the article talking around the problem and what's happening in the marketplace right now. And then the bottom half saying, well, here's the solution from XYZ brand.
That makes sense.
But yeah, it is tough, and you see some people try and hide it, and do lots of tricks to really make it look very native, like it is a true piece of editorial that belongs on those sites. I've always been wary of those tactics because yes, you probably may get more leads that way, but I question the quality of those leads. If the users had no kind of prior conception that they would be called by a company, and they thought they were just getting a online calculator or something, then it's finding the balance between high volume lead generation on front end and quality users that the brand or the client care about.
And I guess, like you said, the advertorial is there to sort of qualify the user, isn't it? That's the whole point. It's almost like entering a funnel, and then they read through it, and if it suits them, it's they take the next steps.
Yeah. Typically native, I think it's massively undervalued in terms of, because there is this kind of quite an organic journey to go on. There's big advertorial pages, and the users spend a couple minutes reading this quite a long form piece of content. Then at the point where they click through to the brand site, they're already quite highly qualified. So whether they convert there or then, it's great if they do. But if they don't, that's a great user to then retarget with Facebook ads, with Google ads. So there's a lot of value in content marketing outside of just straight lead generation on that same session, because what you're doing is educating lots of cold prospects as to why they may want to purchase from you in the future. So that's something actually we're working on at the moment is how do we get that attribution? Because, for a couple of brands we work with, we see in the UK that there's, 500,000 people a month read articles that we're pushing out there about why, over 50s should buy life insurance from this one particular brand. Only, we may generate, thousands of leads per month for them. What's happening to those other 450,000 people who've read very positive words about them? And I'm sure they get swept up through organic search, through Facebook retargeting, and how does that get attributed to, top of the funnel content marketing?
It's like the old last click wins, but they haven't clicked. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And what? Sorry, Daniel, go on.
I was just on what Joe said. I thought it was quite interesting because we've ran advertorials before, but in the B2B sense. But the one thing we've always found is that maybe we get less leads but they tend to be better quality leads because they've been qualified. So I think if you're taking it to a client, that's quite a unique angle to go for sort of compared to other types of lead generation, to really go for quality over quantity, and kind of say to them, look, we're qualifying these in advance for you, so they're going to be high quality. I guess that's a selling point for you guys when you.
Yeah, it is massively. Typically, contact rates through native are some like the best that you'll see. There's always going to be varying quality, I guess, and that's something that you need to kind of, I guess, deal with the client is. And one of my kind of pet hates is everyone treats leads as equal. They'll pay you X per lead, and all leads are then that rate, which is fine. It's simple, but it's crazy because all leads have different quality, and also all sources where you generate these leads based on the ads that you're using, based on the pages that you're sending them through, based on the publishers that they're viewing this content on, all convert to different rates. And having kind of solid feedback loops and structures where you can find more of the ones that have fantastic quality and very high sales rates or very high profitability for the brands, and less of the ones that may generate lots of leads but aren't really that great in terms of quality is important. And that's one thing I think which we do really well at, but it's difficult and it's time consuming. That's a big resource issue, which can be solved with technology, but lots of brands don't. I think most brands just say, hey, we're doing lead generation and we're generating them for X per lead. And that's as far as they go into it.
Yeah, it's the old thing where they just lump them all together, don't they? So like Facebook leads coming in, native, they'll be doing something else, affiliates, and then they just assume that they're all going to be working at the same rate. But if you go granular into it, like you said, then they can do it. And that's the other problem you find, I'm guessing, with a lot of clients, is actually getting the sales back that they make, right? So you can't actually track it necessarily.
Yeah. So we're reliant on them to do that properly. We can advise in terms of setups and in terms of tracking and how they can do that. In terms of pulling, we can pass parameters for site IDs, for ad IDs, platform IDs into the URL where they convert, and then they can see in their CRM, this lead came from the Sun on this ad, and we can see then, by huge online pivot tables, what the conversion rates are, the contact rates of a user who's seen this ad on the Sun. But to do that, that relies on their dev team to do that properly. With varying degrees of success. Yeah.
And it's, sorry, Daniel, go on.
I was just thinking how, if you have a client and, they read your advertorial and then a month later they search it again and they sort of remember your name, but they don't come in through that particular click, like you demonstrating to your clients that, actually, how your impact there kind of is kind of quite a long tail to it. So how you demonstrate that value to people, or just kind of,
at the moment that's all anecdotal, and it's really hard to actually have that quantifiable. It's something I'm working on at the moment with another company that we're linked with to try and solve that problem, because I'm sure there is this kind of halo effect of content marketing where we're selling on a performance basis and generating leads on that same session, but all of this positive content out there that people are consuming on news sites is definitely improving their display results, their Facebook results, their organic search. People are reading good articles, and you're right. Something may trigger them in 2 weeks' time, a month's time, and they go back on branded search, and we don't see any attribution of that. And it's tough, I guess, to square that. And it's only getting tougher with third-party cookies, because we obviously have the data on our advertorial pages, which is built and hosted by us, but often the users converting on the client site. And then to do proper attribution, you need relying on third-party cookies, which then lots of browsers are blocking, and it gets messy.
Yeah, and I guess because you're hosting the pages, they're not able to track it, and it's the funnel, isn't it? Really, it's like a space that's not been connected to anything.
Yeah, Yeah, so this is actually a good thing for, if anybody on this podcast who's listening and has a solution for that, I would love to kind of know, you're right, we're sending users to a page that is controlled by us. They're then converting on a page that's owned and controlled by the client. How do we tell the attribution of our page on the client site other than just leads that are generated in that same session?
I guess you could put their, can you put their tracking on your site?
You can, but it relies on the user accepting third-party cookies, right? And like with iOS 14, with everything else, it's third-party at that point. If we could build the advertorial and host it as the client, but then we lose some of the nativeness, I guess, of the article. You want native to almost appear like third-party tone of voice. It's part of like a news site where it's much more powerful. Somebody recommending a brand to you than the brand saying, "Hey, I'm fantastic." It's it's much better for me to say, "Hey, you're interested in life insurance. You want to go to this brand?" Then you see an ad for that brand and say, "We're the best," because you don't trust them because it's them. So what you want is the third party advertorial. As soon as you host it by the brand and have it under their domain, it loses that kind of native news story look about it.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? It's something to have a think about, definitely.
So I mean, you've kind of not hinted at it there, but going into that there. So the next question I've got is how you see the future of native going, I guess, based on what you want to happen and what you actually think will happen. I have two questions, but
I think it's going almost like social. So going back, 18 months or 2 years ago, I was spending a lot of my time and the team was spending a lot of their time in native platforms and with technology stacks, figuring out the best price to pay per click on all these different publishers and all these different ads, right? So we'd have quite sophisticated technology stacks that would look at our earnings per click on all these different publishers and set our CPCs lower than our earnings per click to try and find, users that are profitable for us and the brand. We don't necessarily have to do that anymore because a lot of the native networks are developing their own algorithms similar to how Facebook has, where they know, lots of data points on their users as to what content they consume, what ads they interact with, what things they purchased in the past. So typically their own smart algorithms are better than our targeting or us, manually playing around with bids. So native, I think, is going that way, similar to Facebook, where eventually, rather than bidding CPC, you're going to set a target CPA or some kind of target goal, and it's going to change your bids based on its own thought process around, whether this user is going to convert or not. Which means as a business that does a lot of native lead generation, a lot more of our time now is going into the creative and the funnel to optimize that. That's the point of difference. If the algorithm is then deciding, where best to serve it, and we don't have these bidding strategies, that is our like secret sauce of how we get the best out of native. And the new way to get the best out of native is just to do better advertising with better conversion funnels. And that, I think, especially next year, will be more important. Yeah, for sure.
What and how do you prefer working with clients then, on a CPL or CPA, so you can measure it differently?
Typically CPL, because at least there's some shared risk there. I quite like clients being bought into the fact that they need to work the leads properly. I think we've had CPA relationships, and some are great, by the way, but typically if a client, just put myself in the client's shoes, and I've got two pots of leads, these on a CPL and these on a CPA, I naturally or subconsciously, I'm always going to work the CPL leads harder because I've got costs associated to them. So I'm going to put my reps on them. I'm going to try and work them quicker because whether I sell them or not, I'm still paying for them. Where the CPA leads, they're almost like an afterthought because if you sell them, that's great. That's money to you. If you don't, then so what?
And it puts no onus on the lead generator as well, right? I remember in the past being told to work in a CPA, and it's like, okay, but you can't sort of tell us what to do then. It's up to us.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily want to be at the whim of how good the client sales team is, because that's always going to change. They're always going to have staffing issues. They're going to have people off. They're going to have bad days, good days. They're going to have somebody who goes on to Trustpilot and leaves them a bad review and it affects their sales that day. I can generate really good quality leads, and the agency can generate really good quality leads. They need to be responsible for a part of the funnel. Yeah,
definitely.
So I guess just talking what you said about the kind of the sales team, the people you send it on to, I mean, what are the kind of problems you face with your clients in terms of getting the best out of the leads you're sending them?
But I wouldn't say there are problems. I'd say there's varying degrees of success to have with them. Typically measuring time to contact and improving that is always important, right? So having some kind of, good dialing system where, leads come in real time and they actually have a CRM system in place where it's also dialed and they call the user. there's definitely like a half-life of, you know, a lead generated and time to contact, and it is linear. You know, it just drops off. You know, if you wait an hour, wait 2 hours, you wait a day, that lead's dead. You know, they wanted a quote today. Why are you getting back to them in 2 days' time? So that's really important. On the technical side of stuff, there's lots of things that people are doing with, you know, dialing systems, because Android phones now are really sophisticated in knowing what's a call center. So we've had clients before who generate hundreds, thousands of leads per day through numerous sources, and then overnight they find it really tough because Google's released an update where all of their numbers are coming through on Android as spam. That's something completely outside of our control, but they need to fix that with Google and work with their dialer in order to make sure that the numbers are coming through correctly. And, you know, it's not immediately setting off flags before, you know, the users actively asked for a quote. You're calling them with their quote, but they're reluctant to pick up the phone because there's a big red flashing image saying scam, scam, scam. That's a challenge on the technical side. Those are the two major ones. You know, if we can generate good leads and they call them quickly, usually results are great.
Do you have any clients that aren't taking them real time, that are, you know, trying to dial them manually or do something else? Or?
Not anymore. It's a good question. We've had them before, and I guess when I was more naive, it's always like, oh, should we take them on or not? And you think, oh, okay, you know, let's give it a go. Maybe it'll work this time. It never does. It never does. They may like batch upload them. They may do it at the end of the day or get CSV'd or whatever. It's just, you know, they're never going to be as competitive as a user or as a company who's working in real time. Therefore, our cost per leads will be diminished because the value that they're getting from them is lower. Therefore, they can't pay as high as their competitor, and it just doesn't flush out properly. Yeah, those relationships are usually fairly short-lived.
And yeah, I get, because the conversion rates must be massive as well, like you said, because they've gone through this sort of double stage qualification thing where they obviously see the advertorial, consume that, come through the funnel, then go straight into a center, into a dialer, to a sort of a good agent, hopefully. What's, obviously it changes per vertical, but do you have like a target that you try and work to where you were thinking about the conversion rates, or does it change that massively?
Massively changed per vertical and how thorough, I guess, the follow-up process is with the brand. You know, some brands have very good, like the email sequencing they've set up. You know, a lead comes into them and then they have a good email sequencing as to what happens next, what happens if you fill in the details incorrectly, and they have lots of value-adding content that really warms up the user. We say sub 10% is pretty bad in terms of sell rate. We've seen brands, you know, sell leads at like 25% and make it work. We have brands that sell at 5%, and that's fantastic for them. So it really, I think, depends on the niche and the value they get. You know, and
are you measuring the lifetime sales or just the initial dial and then they, you know, like one day and then they feed it back? Or
typically the initial or on 3 attempts. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of lifetime sales that come in because lots of people will get a quote and it will sit in their inbox and then they'll be called about it and then they'll sign up in a month's time at the end of the month when they actually wanted to do it, and they're kind of preemptively getting the details.
But you can usually, so yeah, from when we've been running it, you can see this, you know, lead comes in. If they dial it immediately, they're going to make like 70% of the sales. Then second dial, it'll drop to like 10%, and it might be, but there's always, depending on how long the dialing cycle is, can be up to a month. Obviously, it could be 3 dials, but there's always something that they potentially gather from it, isn't there?
Yeah.
And that's where it's great having like an API that can just feed sales back to you rather than, I was just thinking like doing it as the lifetime of the total leads rather than just the immediate like hit of them. Because 25% is massive as an immediate hit, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
that's great.
So you mentioned, I think, the financial kind of markets and niches, but are there any other particular niches you think that are really good and effective for using native in?
Yeah, so native can be used. It's really just considering like the medium that you're buying media into, right? It can work for anything if the offer is good and relevant to the users that you're looking to target. You know, it's the same as any other media channel. So we do a lot of lead generation, especially in the UK. But outside of that, we've seen a big trend in like direct to consumer businesses over the last year. Obviously, with lockdown and retailers being shut and people forced to buying online, we've seen lots of people who traditionally put a lot of budget through social, and particularly Facebook with e-commerce and direct-to-consumer offerings, moving some of that budget to native. Because native, you know, it can work really well for those offers, especially if you've got a really good story to tell that can be, you know, presented as a native news article. And Facebook has been, you know, very competitive, and CPMs are only ever going to rise there. So, you know, similar to Google going back, you know, 5 or 10 years where CPC advertising was fantastic and get really cheap clicks. Same with Facebook, everyone moves there. CPMs rise, it gets competitive. Native, I think, is going to become that eventually, but right now there's kind of a whole world of users out there surfing these sites looking for the next product that they want to generate a lead for or buy, and it's just getting that whole journey right.
What's the sort of max that you can hit? Is the reach, obviously I'm guessing it changes at particular times of day, and on certain articles that they come in from will be different, but do you have like a max target every day with each client, or is it just like take it as it comes?
Some have caps, yeah. So we typically cap our lead gen guys because of call center capacity, right? So they actually physically have a number of people in seats who can handle these leads. The larger ones, they're dealing with 500 to 1,000 leads a day. Smaller guys, obviously, it's a lot lower. We typically won't take on a client unless we can generate, we think we can generate them more than 50 leads a day. That's not to say we need to do it on day one and we need to just chuck loads of leads to them and hope for the best. There's a test and learn process here. But if they can't sustain more than 50 leads a day, it's going to be really difficult to get critical mass to make it work for everyone involved. The e-com guys are usually completely uncapped, and it's, if we've got the CPAs right and we've got the funnel right, it's, they'll open the taps. They just want to sell as much product as possible.
What's do you buy all the media, or do they have to pay up front, or how do you do it?
In 99% of our clients, we pay all the media. Yeah.
Wow, it's a lot, right? When you're getting 1,000 leads a day.
Yeah, that was the biggest challenge in starting V2, and I had to generate outside investment purely for cash flow purposes.
Yeah, makes sense.
The model's solid. We've got a really good core team who know what they're doing. But my biggest challenge was we're spending a lot of money with our suppliers, whether it's Google, Outbrain, Facebook, whoever, with no trading history as a business. So very short credit terms, if any. So we're prepaying media and we're doing it at scale. Clients are paying me on, monthly net 30 terms or something. I'm getting money in 50 days. I'm spending thousands, tens of thousands a day. There's a cash flow problem here. Once I solved that, it wasn't too bad.
So you just mentioned about the team and having a really good team. What's the sort of learning curve of running stuff on native? So obviously you're dealing with technology and different platforms and things to run it on. Is it similar to like Google or running ads on Facebook, or is there a difference, or is the learning curve greater or shorter? Or
it's different. I think it's just all come down to understanding the medium that you're buying into. That's really it. Somebody who's a good Facebook buyer or a good Google buyer will be a good native buyer, as long as they get that the user is consuming content around news articles, and they tailor their ads and they tailor their landing pages to fit that moment in time. The difficulty with native historically has been that your native universe is almost every website in the world. So, if I go onto a native platform and start buying ads with no prior knowledge, I'm going to start getting clicks from all these random sites and blogs I've never heard of. A lot of these are going to be really rubbish quality, because you want quality from the major news publishers that have trust, that have authority in the space, that have no bot traffic. So historically, the challenge with native was having solid like block lists or whitelists of publishers that you want to target and ones you don't, or tech in place to be able to detect bad quality sites before spending lots of money on them. That's less so now. Again, going back to what I was saying about like native algorithms becoming smarter for putting your budget at the places that are working. That's less important, but it still helps. If you've got a good data set as to these are the publishers that really work for this niche, or these are the sites that no matter what the niche is, you just want to block them because they're never going to convert for you. That's obviously really helpful. So
you get tracked as like an ID then for each lead that's generated, or
yeah.
Cool. And then you can just measure that all the way back to the conversions.
Yeah. So I guess that's something that we do really well is, a single client can do native really well. We benefit from, having like a hive mind of lots of clients and lots of verticals and lots of buyers, where we can see trends pretty quickly and see if sites pop up overnight that are going to cause everyone a big issue. We see them on one client and we can block it across the rest. Yeah,
that's a really good thing. By doing it in aggregate, it's actually far better running it through someone like you than the brand trying to do it themselves, because of that insight that you've got.
Yeah, there should be quite a big efficiency in, we've hit a lot of challenges, we've hit a lot of hurdles through other spend, which it's all our own spend, but for other brands, therefore they don't have to fall into the same holes as we've fallen in before.
And do you ever get much fraud through native, or is it?
Again, it used to be a much bigger issue. I think, lots of, especially the big tech companies, are getting better at it. yeah, it definitely was an issue where you'd see sites come in and on your GA report, it's 100% bounce rate, 0 time on site, but somehow you've had 3,000 sessions. It's that was a problem. Less so now. Yeah, there's always varying quality, for each publisher.
Yeah.
But out and out non-human traffic, little.
And what's the rate of conversions, do you think, in comparison to something like PPC, or because there's more of an education, right, for the lead coming in?
Yeah, it depends. So search and intent-based search is always going to win if you're measuring straight conversion rate, but it's why it's the most expensive, right? If somebody's going on there and searching for the best remortgage deal in Bristol, then you can bet your ass that guy wants to get a remortgage deal and they're based in Bristol. With native, obviously that's a lot more difficult to do, but you do have that middle qualification page. So yeah, conversion rates are great. They stack up really favorably against Facebook, typically because Facebook is great at finding the right users, but people do Facebook ads straight through to lead form, and they didn't have the educational piece in the middle. So what they do is they probably got better targeting. On Facebook, you're targeting people of a certain age, of a certain gender, a certain demographic, in market for X, Y, Z. That's fantastic. You don't necessarily have all of that targeting capabilities within native, but you do typically have these advertorial pieces where you can really go into detail on the problems, the solutions that you're solving, and get them quite educated by the time they then click through and take action.
Yeah, and what so you mentioned the landing pages earlier. So once you've obviously had a click through, the users consume the advertorial, how important is the landing page after that process? So because obviously they're interested, right? They've clicked through, so now the journey begins of creating a lead. What's the sort of methodology that you use or see, or is it constantly changing? Or
no, there's a few kind of rules that always hold true, and it's give them what they're there to do. We've done a lot of the hard work first already. We've got the ad, they've clicked on that, they've read a big piece, they spent 2 minutes reading this article, they then click to get a quote. Give them the simplest way of them completing that quote form. Don't then give them more information. Don't give them navigation bars where they're now looking at your blog and everything, your history of a company. That's all irrelevant. This person is engaged in whatever you're trying to do. Just give them the simplest way of them giving you their details so you can give them a call and convert them into a customer. That's a general rule of thumb. People then do it one of two ways typically. One is, single page lead form, where you've got, name, address, age, potentially, telephone number. Or they do a multi-step funnel where if you need more qualification questions in terms of, who's your current mortgage with, what's your interest rate, certain criteria that really helps the sales agents to pre-source, the best deals when they call you, then you can do it as a multi-step form. So they get those questions over multiple pages, and it's a lot less, they can tick boxes, and it's a lot less tedious than filling out, lots and lots of lead data.
Yeah. And what does the brand that you create with the landing page, does that need to match like the advertorial, or are you trying to match the advertorial to the page that have come in from, and then the landing page would be different?
We try and match our advertorial to the lead form that we're sending them, not necessarily in terms of the brand, because we want to present it as third party, but it's got a similar theme to it. The similar fonts, the similar colors in play, so there is almost a continuous journey. We didn't want it to look like a huge disconnect. They were reading this article around the subject and I did click to this thing and it just looks completely out of place. So continuity is massive in native, and there's lots of tricks we do with our ads to give continuity to the user. So one of the simplest tricks we have with native ads, whatever ad you're using in native, so whatever that initial headline is someone's clicking, your best one of those, make it your sub headline on your article. It sounds like really easy, but tricks like that really add continuity, because they've clicked on this, they then read it again and it all makes sense, and the bounce rate in your pages will immediately lower.
Yeah, I love some of the ads. Passport.
That's the oldest book in the book. So that was something that came about years ago. I was at a conference actually, and one of the speakers talking about native ads was basically just did a whole thing where he basically just did this. Everybody immediately looks at your hand, right? And that's exactly the same thing with online ads. If you've got it's really hard to do an ad for a service-led business, because how do you, an image that shows life insurance, or an image that shows mortgages, or an image that shows credit cards, is really difficult to do something that's interesting. So instead, you do people of the right demographic who could be your potential customers and have them holding something, a credit card, a birth certificate, life insurance, whatever. But just by them holding something, it immediately draws the eye to what's in that person's hand, what are they holding, and then let the headline do the work. So typically, image drives click-through rate, it drives engagement, for them to look at it, and then you want your headline to be relevant to the offer or to the advertorial that you've written.
It's funny, actually. We were running some campaigns for a client of ours, and we had a picture of a boiler, and we were running on Facebook, and we just had the text, whatever, a picture of a boiler, and we're measuring the click-to-conversion rates and everything, and say it was like 5%. And someone said, just put a finger in there pointing at the boiler. So we did that, and the click rates doubled just from this finger pointing at the boiler. But it was unbelievable.
Yeah. So there's loads of stuff we do like that with and there's lots of hacks on that on native. Native, because you're buying on a cost per click basis typically, the biggest thing to drive efficiency is to increase your CTR, which is why you get some advertisers take it to the nth degree, right? And you get quite salacious creatives and ad headlines like, how the hell is this working? It's because they're trying to drive such high CTR that the CPCs are very, very low, and it works anyway. But there's lots of tricks we do with our images to layer them. So, if we find an image that works, we'll then cut out the person, put a different background behind them, have them holding different things, and have kind of 2 or 3 layers to the image, where we can continually test. If we've got a brand that's quite traditional, what about we put that image, but now they're standing in front of Big Ben or a London bus? Stupid things like that. It helps catch the eye, but it also responds to the right type of audience. Who is their target market, what are they engaged with, and try and do it that way.
And do you do all that in house?
Yeah. That's where a lot of the resource goes, if I'm honest, is image creation and the science behind it. Because brands neglect that most out of all the native. Native, your whole success is on this like tiny little image and 80 characters. That really drives what your CPC is, the users that you're attracting, what sites you can get on, and how competitive your bids can be. If you don't get that right, everything else, you could spend thousands on a beautifully crafted advertorial with the best copywriter in the world. If no one's clicking on that initial ad, or the right types of users aren't clicking on that initial ad, it's all wasted. So continually split testing different ad creatives and headlines to try and drive initial engagement, lower CPCs, but those kind of outliers that have high CTR, low CPC, but also convert to for us and the brand. That's where it's really interesting. But they're the most hard to find, because typically, I guess there's a drop off. Usually the higher you drive your ad CTR, the less relevant it is for the users, because by nature, you're appealing to more people. Therefore, the types of users who are clicking on it aren't necessarily going to convert. So finding those ad creatives that are very clickable, but also very clickable and convert, that's where you can drive really big lead volumes. And we spend the vast majority of our resources trying to find those ad creatives.
Sorry, just one more question around the advertorial. So obviously, if they're on like I don't know, the Daily Mail or something, and they click through to an advertorial, that same advertorial is going to be used on the Sun, wherever else. So you create the seamless experience from the advertorial to the landing page, but what about the experience from like the article they're consuming, which is in one layout and format, and then they click through? Does that ever cause any issues, or is that just, it's fine and it's like a standard sort of blog layout?
There's 2 ways of doing it. Yeah, we've tried. We don't at the moment. We have one, we have our best advertorial, and that runs everywhere. But you're right, there is an efficiency where if the style of the Daily Mail, in terms of how they lay out their articles, the language they use, the fonts they use, is very different to how the MSN, how they present their articles. Ideally, you would present your article so it looks not the same. You don't want to copy them. You don't want to see, dupe the user, but you want it to be familiar to them. It's all about, having that trust and familiarity in the content that they're consuming. So I'm sure we could drive better results if we personalized every landing page to all of the major publishers in the UK. The issue we've got by doing that is speed of execution. We'd have to have separate campaigns targeting every individual publisher, which then can get penalized in the networks, because if you're only whitelisting one publisher, you kind of, you're not as competitive as a campaign that's run of network. So you're kind of paying higher on a cost per click basis. There's ways of doing it where you can, with technology, have one campaign targeting everything, and then based on the referral URL, if referral equals Daily Mail, show them this landing page that looks like the Daily Mail. But that's uncompliant with the native networks, because you're technically cloaking them at that point. They need to see the landing page and approve it and everything else.
Yeah, and I suppose the danger for the networks is that you actually potentially become competitive, because if you started really figuring this out, you just strike your own deals and have you as the recommended partner, because they look more like the.
Well, that's actually a really valid point, and you can broker deals directly with the publisher. usually those native widgets, that real estate is kind of hived off in exclusive contracts with their preferred native partner, you know, to do like whoever. But if you get a campaign really singing and you get fantastic conversions from the Daily Mail, you can definitely, you know, approach their sales team and say, hey, you know, we've got a campaign working on native. Is there any other ad slots on site? Is there any other partnerships we can do here? You know, we know really what your users convert at for us. We know this is working. How else can we access your inventory? And you can make it work. Yeah, sure.
That's brilliant.
One thing I was going to ask you, Joe, you talked about sort of trends developing, and it's quite, once you run a native ad yourself, you suddenly see things appear, you can't unsee it, you're suddenly spotting, there's a few old guys I've seen like 100 different times, I'm like, I recognize you're the guy from, you know, become the little weird celebrities in this world. But when you talk about sort of like trends developing, like, I guess that's just in the UK, because I don't see, you know, in other countries what the trends are there. So do you have to kind of keep abreast of kind of trends that are developing all over, and what the ones that are in, you know, in different countries all the time?
Definitely. I think because native's so visible, competition is the biggest challenge, right? And the biggest variable for us to make money today or make money tomorrow isn't necessarily how good our ads are and what we're bidding. It's who else is competing for this user and what do their ads look like, and have they just copied us or used ours as a benchmark and tried to make it better? So there's always this like one-upmanship in native, where somebody gets a vertical working and generates lots of leads, but there's lots of lead generators in the UK all trying to do that. And as soon as they see something at scale, usually if it's running at scale, it's probably working, because no one's going to spend loads of money on something that's not working, and therefore you get lots of copycat advertisers. So being innovative with images, with landing pages, with brands, with offers, with niches, with countries, yeah, hugely important for me as a business, because if we do the same thing for the same advertiser on the same site, you know, it's only a matter of time before 3 or 4 people see that and try and do it themselves. Yeah.
And I guess you're using sort of like stock imagery for these, so everyone can access them. You know, you're not shooting your own photos and kind of
both. So we usually start with a stock image, and then we'll layer on our own bits in front of it, or change the background. The best native images are the images that don't look like stock images. You know, it's completely opposite to e-com on like Facebook or Amazon, where you want really professional product shots that convert. Native, you want it to look like it's been taken with an old iPhone, because again, it feels more natural. It feels like this person is actually one of their stories. You know, they've kind of written into the Sun, and they've sent in the article.
So hypothetically, I don't know, say you've got a next door neighbour and you just take a picture of him pointing at his boiler, and you're like, this works really well. Can you kind of own that advert, or like convey someone?
Yeah. No, 100%. You know, if you've taken that and that's your ad, yeah, you know, it's difficult to truly own it, because there may be people who copy it. You can serve them with cease and desist. You can, you know, there is routes you can go down. Typically, there's like an unwritten rule in native, where if somebody's obviously produced that ad themselves, you don't touch it. Or at least I don't touch it. I tell my team not to touch it. You know, if there's an ad that somebody's obviously gone out of their way to create and do themselves, that's theirs. That's their IP. Brilliant. We'll create our own. If it's a stock image and we see somebody using it, again, we don't steal it, because it's, you know, that's their idea, but we take it as a guide. You know, this stock image is working. How do we make this stock image better? How do we, you know, like Simon, you know, can you add a finger? You know, and that's fair game.
You know, a few years ago, a guy who used to work at Databall, someone else was just searching the internet, whatever, and there was a picture of him that someone had taken at the old company he used to work at. I think it was like holding a council tax bill or something, and just appeared on like an MSN article. And he sat right behind him, and he went, "Come and look at this. Is that you?" And he went, "Oh, they've used it. I can't believe they've used it. That's me. I want the copyright of it and everything else." Yeah. Someone had taken it in the office and used it on the native app.
Oh, quite well, didn't it? So it was running for quite a long time, because it was like,
yeah, it definitely happens. And yeah, that's a big frustration of mine. You know, we spend a lot of money and a lot of resource creating our own images, and we'll often see other people running them, and you try and control it, but it's difficult.
And what and the advertorials themselves, you do all those in house as well. You've got and the copyright share with the brands and stuff, and they can say this bit needs tweaking.
Yeah, typically the process is the brand will supply us with, you know, a rough guideline as to what they want to achieve, right? And it's whether it's a lead, whether it's a sale, you know, this is what the action is that we're going to get paid on, and then it's up to us to decide the best route to get that user to take that action. So we will write copy in house, but with feedback and compliance from the brand. You know, we don't know everything about all these different niches that we're running in. We can write copy that we think is going to resonate with users who have this problem. But we then give it back to the brand for amends for their compliance team to check over and make sure we're not getting ourselves into any unnecessary problems.
Cool.
Cool. Well, I think we've covered quite a lot there, Joe. Thank you for your time. The only thing I was going to ask you, just to sort of end, really, is what have you got planned for version 2? Talk about your company.
Yeah,
Directly.
so I think we've done loads on native lead gen, but I guess this is what I've got planned is I hope anyway we do native lead gen really well, but I don't want to be known as the guys who do native lead gen really well. I mean, that's something that we do, but I'd much rather be the guys who do content marketing really well. And native doesn't matter, whether it's Facebook, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Instagram, Reddit, native, Outbrain, Twitter, Google, doesn't matter. What we do really well is creating content that users want to read and then take action from, and that's what I've got, I guess, planned for next year, is looking at different channels, different platforms, hiring a lot more people, actually looking at who is the best in market talent who can get the best out of these niches or these platforms for us, and how do we get them under version 2 and then feed them full of brands and e-commerce owners who want to scale their acquisition. Being platform, I don't care what the platform is. I care about good content and content that drives action.
What do you plan to sort of build your own brands doing that, or will you still work on the client's brands? Or
both. So yeah, this is actually a big plan for next year. We have a couple of our own brands at the moment in the lead gen space, which obviously we work with you guys for in terms of lead sites. I'm not sure we'd call them brands yet, but definitely sites that we own and control, and we generate leads and then sell those leads to advertisers in those niches. Yes, we want to be much more of that and do more of that. Owning the customer, I guess, is a big thing. We're, I think, great right now in terms of generating leads efficiently and profitably, but we don't own the customer. So I want to move up the food chain, have the brands own the customer, and then send them off to wherever's best servicing them. Yeah,
that's something like we believe in strongly. I talk about it all the time, actually, on the 10 people that read anything I write on LinkedIn. It's create your own brands and own the relationship with the customers, because a lot of the brands, like the M brands making the sale, the marketing departments and the sales departments are siloed. So they go into one funnel and they never go into another. Although some, like you said, can set up email sequences and things. But as the lead generator, you're in this unique position to actually be the face, if you like, of the consumer or the prospect is identifying with an action being taken. So, product or service being delivered to them and things, and then you can upsell other verticals and things like that if you own the relationship. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we definitely want to get more involved in that space, and I'll be leaning on you guys actually for knowledge and help there. I've just recruited actually someone in the team to help scale that up. Brilliant. Cool. Yeah, we'll love working with you on that, and this has been brilliant. So much insight into native, especially, and obviously the other stuff that you'll be doing going forward, which isn't just native related, but content related. We'll look forward to it, definitely. Yeah, we hope it was useful, and hope people got some value from it and can understand me. I know I've got a tendency to talk quickly about subjects that I'm passionate about, so.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, at least I've got the voice that just drones on, so don't worry about that. Yeah. Cool.
I'll leave it there, but thank you so much. You're a great first guest, and hopefully in the future we'll do a few more, and we'll get you back on when we're in a little bit better. But thank you so much for helping us.
Welcome. Cheers, Dan. Cheers, Simon.
Cheers, Joe. Thanks. Good talking to you. Bye.
You're listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast, and now it's time for the post-chat rundown. It's pretty simple. We talk through the conversation, assess what we've learned from our guest, and pull out the key ideas for you, the stuff we think can make a real difference to your lead gen. The thing that I thought was really interesting is that I think there's two ways of looking at it when it comes to advertorials. On the one, and this is the thing we always say, it's about your intention. On the one side, you can have people who are trying to deceive the prospect and try and trick them into thinking it's a real article and stuff. And Joe was very much against that, and it's kind of what we say. It's far better to do the opposite side and be kind of qualify that person, but not be deceptive, be honest about what's happening. And the result of that is it's all what you're after. If you're trying to build a relationship with a person, it's a great way, and the leads are going to be high quality. You by qualifying them through this big, relatively big article on the way in, it means they're more invested and they're going to be better quality than just chasing numbers and just getting, because some people do it wrong. Some people will just sort of try and trick people, get loads of numbers and then just set up, but that's not going to work in the long run. And that's kind of what Joe was saying. I thought it was interesting.
I think what was interesting as well is how it compares to sort of other types of lead gen. So I don't know, like Facebook, for example, where you can actually go a lot more in depth in terms of the targeting of the user. That still doesn't necessarily mean that they're interested. It just means that you can, your ideal customer, you can sort of target them. What's interesting about advertorials is that they sort of qualify themselves. So they, by consuming this content, they've decided like that's for me, and you sort of, it's a different way of qualifying it completely, which is interesting.
That's
the cost is unreal. I mean, I guess it's the same on Facebook if you're a Facebook agency or PPC as well. But this is the interesting thing about what he's doing is that most people that run like massive PPC or Facebook stuff aren't necessarily doing leads. They do it all on retainers. They're just running the traffic for their client, right? Whereas what's interesting about version 2 and Joe is that he's actually taking all the risk on himself personally. So he's that confident in the abilities of the company and the people they've got working there and the quality of the leads that they can generate. And to do that's for me is like the ultimate expression of lead generation. It's like that confidence in conversions that you're going to be driving such good quality and you really know your stuff, because you can't, he's probably spending hundreds of thousands of pounds a month on traffic and he's getting paid on performance on a per lead basis. So you'd only do that if you're an absolute expert in it. And it's really nice to see.
As well as being an expert, he clearly has, I guess, similar beliefs. He's not trying to do it just to kind of get leads in, spit them up, chew them back out, get some money and all that.
Yeah.
What he's doing is he's genuinely building a relationship between the people he's connecting with, people and brands that he's working for. And I think that's a really nice way of doing it. And I think that's why, that's why he's doing well, is like his intentions and his treatment of the data is like, what we always say is like completely open about it. And I think that's great. Yeah.
And this ultimately is transparency, isn't it? Because like he was saying, they share the advertorials with their clients. They take their input into it. It's just what's going to attract people who are interested in your service or product. And ultimately that's what he's doing, and what it comes down to is just this total transparency from the beginning of the first click of the prospect, the conversion or the subsequent whatever happens with the lead. The whole thing's open. There's nothing hidden. There's no like micro funnels they're sending people down. There's nothing data shooting off anywhere else. It's like completely honed exactly for that client. And that, when it's really interesting speaking to someone like Joe, and like he said, he thinks that native's like an untapped resource for lead generation as well, and you can sort of see it with what he was talking about. But what's interesting is it sort of comes back to this point of transparency. I know I keep saying it, but that's, I think, why it's untapped, because you can only make it work by being hugely transparent. Because it costs that much if you're going to do it on a lead generation basis.
Yeah. So I guess it's like in terms of lockdown, I think I read an article that said just in general, people were consuming more online news than ever. I mean, I don't know if that's still the case. So I think it's
mainly about Donald Trump though, right? It's like,
I think it was about COVID stuff, but just generally people are like fascinated, like a lot's going on. So like, yeah, like if there's more traffic there, it's a time, I guess, to sort of explore that stuff as well. But
why do you imagine you were hairdressers with like a global brand and you could just run native ads on like Donald Trump's hair and click through to...
I would read that if I was on MSN or whatever.
I'd read it 100%. I've read it before, looked at like the way his hair blows and is it real, is it not? And maybe that's what, the future of native will be is, mind you, the costs will go up the more people use it, won't they, rather than down potentially. Because that's the only thing. I think it's the CPL is pretty high just because of the sort of steps, the qualification that the user goes through. But that's like great lead generation, right? It's like qualify the lead before you have to qualify it by ringing them or something or doing some other action.
Yes, two steps is you will get better leads, and it's going for quality over quantity, which is really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the podcast, though, the first one, I'm relatively happy with that. I thought it was good. What I thought was good is we said at the start that we wanted to kind of, be really transparent and just kind of open the kimono. I think I googled that expression in the time.
Oh, it's
a real thing.
is it? I just heard it a few years ago. Someone saying to me, "Open the kimono."
I found
was like, "Ooh, don't really want to see what's underneath."
I found it on Urban Dictionary, but the thing that was good,
what was the description on Urban Dictionary?
Something to do with like Japanese men trying to find out what's under their wives' kimonos or something, but like as the the etymology. But it was.
I was hoping it'd be something more.
No, it was actually. No, it was actually not. It was quite. That sounds quite bad, but like it was about being upfront about your intentions in terms of business, like not hiding things away underneath the kimono, like letting everyone see what you're doing. I think that was that's actually what we said. Like he was completely transparent, not just in terms of what he's doing, but with us. And it's nice to kind of just, I don't know. I don't think digital advertising needs to be a secretive thing where you kind of doing anything surreptitiously or being like coy, trying to trick people. It's just like completely open. Like, this is what we do. Engage with it if you want. If you're not interested in, content is a great way to do that because it's meaningful. It's not just like a quick one-off ad. It's like,
yeah. Well, it's expertise as well, right? Like he's a sort of expert in what he's doing. So if you're an expert, why would you hide it?
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast, the show for serious lead generators. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.